Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A turnabout from President Donald Trump, who, after weeks of openly questioning Greenland security and threatening acquisition, backed off his threats, at least for now, as he announced a framework of a future deal had been reached with NATO regarding the semi-autonomous Danish-dependent territory. But Trump also suggested a deal was in the works with respect to the entire Arctic region, which makes up 40% of this country's landmass, leaving some wondering whether Canada could be next, and how an alliance that's prevented war in Europe for most of a century can prevail. I'm Caryn Ceolin, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking to Robert Baines, president of the NATO Association of Canada, about how Trump's Greenland threats have turned the Arctic into an urgent test for Canada and NATO as a whole. Robert, it's such a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Thanks so much for making the time.
Not at all. A pleasure to be here.
Just to start, for our listeners who don't know, can you just describe for us what exactly the NATO Association of Canada is, and I suppose how the role of the association has become more pronounced during President Donald Trump's second term in office?
Certainly. Well, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, let's put it that way. The NATO Association of Canada was actually founded in the 60s to try to educate to Canadians why NATO exists, why it's important for Canada to be a member, and in a broader sense, why security is important. And I became president in 2017. And since that time, the importance of NATO has grown immeasurably as the rest of the rules-based international order has kind of come across a great deal of challenge. NATO has been the strongest element of multilateralism, the greatest alliance. So its most recent challenges with a United States that is equivocal about supporting NATO, it's been quite a significant change for what we do and how we explain the importance of NATO and defense to Canadians.
Yeah, could you explain for us how having the U.S. president covet Greenland and threaten to acquire it by force upend basically everything that NATO is supposed to stand for?
Well, it's a big question. We only have so much time, but you have to kind of go back to the beginnings of NATO. NATO was created because the First and the Second World War created so much death and destruction that the Allies at the end said, we're not doing that again. The beginnings of the Second World War especially were, there are many causes, but the whole aspect that European countries were defending one another with bilateral defense agreements, i.e. one country would say that they would defend another. And it turned out that when push came to shove, a one-to-one guarantee of defense was not enough when the chips were actually on the table, when Germany actually invaded a neighbor. It meant that one country was not willing to stick up for another. The insight that gave to NATO was that if you have many countries tied together to all say that we will defend one another, come what may, that's the strength. And it is that strength which actually creates more peace or a more likelihood for peace, because nobody wants to attack a team. Nobody wants to make the first move against a group of countries that clearly can defend each other and have dedicated themselves to defending one another. So when you have that arrangement, the most important aspect is unity, is agreeing with one another, is trusting one another. If you ever have trouble sleeping and want to read the actual NATO treaty itself, you begin to realize it's not that dictatorial. It doesn't actually demand each country do X, Y, or Z. What it does is say that each country must do something. And the reason that works is because NATO is working constantly to maintain trust, to work together. And when you have a country that suddenly does not want to play by those rules, that wants to take what was a non-zero-sum collaborative group, a collaborative endeavor, and make it into a zero-sum where there is a winner and a loser, that just doesn't work.
I'll certainly have to put that on my reading list, that's for sure. I wonder what you make now that Trump has announced this so-called framework of a future deal. after meeting with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who has been described as the Trump whisperer. He backs off from his threats. He backtracks on imposing tariffs on European countries who opposed his Greenland takeover efforts. What do you make of this turnabout? Because I imagine NATO allies are all left asking, versions of the same question. Why did Trump create all this drama just to back off?
Yeah, there's been a lot of obvious investigation as to, okay, well, what did Secretary General Rutte actually say? There have not been exact details, but a lot of it just seems to be that he laid out what was already the state of affairs, i.e., that the United States was welcome to open further bases on Greenland, that would have to be negotiated, but that was already on the table, that NATO is interested in Arctic security and serious about defending not only Greenland, but the entire Arctic, and that the US would potentially be able to have certain agreements with regards to mineral rights. So that was Mr. Trump's whole gambit. That's what he wanted. Although I suspect that his image of an American empire or of a North America with American flags all over it did have something to do with his original interest. But I think once he saw that there was that much pushback, that he kind of said, all right, well, that is, I can say face with this agreement, even though it is just stating the fact of what was the state of play. So it is a great challenge when it comes to this. But I would like to just say that merely the fact of Mr. Trump saying that he'd be willing to perhaps use either economic coercion or actual force against another NATO member, that is not just business as usual. Again, he takes this very gangster view that he should be able to use his force to get his way. And that is the exact opposite of what the world has been trying to do since the end of the Second World War, i.e., to create a world which is much more predictable and where the idea of sovereignty is the number one rule of the rules-based international order.
You made mention there to the statement earlier on that I think set off alarm bells in Ottawa, and that being with Trump announcing this framework of a deal with respect to Greenland, he said that it would also include the entire Arctic region. And we know that that would obviously include Canada. The Arctic makes up about 40% of this country's landmass. I wonder how concerned we should be about Mark Rutte possibly negotiating shipping routes or sovereignty or alliance politics on behalf of the entire Arctic, which again includes us here in Canada.
Well, I think it's clear the Secretary General, he is at pains to explain he is not an actor in this. So he's more of a convener. The Secretary General does have a political role in as much as he helps to build consensus, but the actual decision is not his. So we do have to be concerned, as we always should be, about our own sovereignty. What Canada has insisted is the Canadian Northwest Passage for years. But it's very interesting. NATO has not always seen involvement in the Arctic as a good thing. It's pretty new transpiring. It's 2022 with the second invasion of Ukraine. Suddenly, NATO started to take a look at the Arctic Council, a formerly very useful multilateral organization that tried to keep the Arctic demilitarized. So NATO didn't want to kind of countermand an institution that was working very well with Russia. But with the invasion of Ukraine, that was all out the window, and NATO started looking very seriously at beefing up its Arctic security. And I must mention that for the first time, I think in its history, the former Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg visited the Canadian Arctic. And from then on in, Canada has started to seriously look at the Arctic as another front, if you will, of NATO.
Yeah, because the Arctic was once a pretty distant, long-term concern. I wonder, from your perspective, how Trump's Greenland threats have turned the Arctic really into an urgent strategic test for Canada and for the whole of NATO. I mean, how has he exposed the region's vulnerabilities?
Yeah, well, that's a good way of putting it. He has exposed so much vulnerability, as much as his manner is antithetical to NATO and to so much of the rules-based international order. The one thing it has done has thrust the responsibility of sovereignty and defending it upon the shoulders of those who always should have been spending their own money to defend it. All of Europe now and Canada are now at the 2% spending of GDP on defense. We should have been on that 10 years ago, even more than that. And the challenge is that Donald Trump, like many other things, he's like a broken clock. He's still right, once a day, and when or twice a day rather. And what happens is that he is quite true in pointing out that the U.S. has been subsidizing our public education, our public health, our social services. The United States has been subsidizing those things for decades, and it's the same with Europe. And we do have to take responsibility for our own security. Stephen Harper really started to push on Arctic security and Arctic defense during his tenure. And unfortunately, not that much happened. But I think now we are going to have to start looking very seriously at further Arctic defense. And I know the government has been for quite some time, but now the money is going to have to be spent for sure in the next few months.
Yeah, all of this is coming just as you rightly lay out. Canada was just thinking it was getting its defense house in order. The long-term goal being to spend 5% of GDP by 2035. Investments, as you say, being directed towards Arctic security. Is all of this enough?
Well, look, I am most concerned by some of the images that Donald Trump constantly puts out, including and the White House channel itself. I'm sure you will have seen this. There's an image of various leaders of Europe sitting around the Oval Office and Mr. Trump's desk, and what they've done is they've edited an image, a placard of North America, and both Greenland and Canada have U.S. flags over their entire territory, and that's just you don't even joke about those things. That is what everybody died for in the Second World War. And that is, when we say never again, we're not just talking about the Holocaust, we're talking about all of those essentially barbaric practices that we have been perpetrating throughout human history, that we just use war as another means of politics. And after the Second World War, we said, we're not going to do that again. And here's Mr. Trump acting like a bully, like a thug, like some mafia boss, throwing around these things because he thinks it makes him the big man. Well, it makes you a betrayer of everything that we fought and died for in the Second World War. And it's just so frustrating that he does not see that. And now, of course, he's casting aspersions at modern NATO contributions to the defense of not only the alliance, but of the United States itself.
The fire hose of news from America can feel like a lot these days.
If you're trying to figure out what to make of it all, we got you.
I'm Katie Simpson.
And I'm Paul Hunter. We're correspondents here in Washington,
working just around the corner from where much of the action is taking place.
2 blocks from the White House.
And that's the name of our new podcast.
For top-notch analysis of U.S. politics from a Canadian perspective, find 2 blocks from the White House every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts,
including YouTube.
How much is the accelerated defense spending, though, going to be able to stop him? Because, the U.S. stands right now at the center of the defense strategies of not just Canada, but other allies like Britain, France, and Germany. I mean, you mentioned before they truly probably couldn't afford to go their own way right now. I mean, Trump has repeatedly said NATO is nothing without American power at its core. Just how true is that?
Well, I suspect that a lot of the case with Mr. Trump, it's a matter of packaging and marketing. If, like the NATO 2% and then the 5% GDP agreements, it was all put down to this would have never happened without Mr. Trump. You'll see Secretary General Ruta saying that all the time, that that Mr. Trump has made NATO stronger than it's ever been, which again is correct, but he's also made it weaker than it's ever been because there is no trust now, which is the beating heart of the alliance. So if we can draw attention, if we create some form of an Arctic bastion or a sentry where NATO is putting up X number of ships, and we've now got satellite capabilities which are going to be brought online. If we can show X, Y, and Z and God knows, flatter the president by saying it's the Trump line or something like that, he may actually see that it's enough. But again, very often these are things which were already in motion, they were already happening, and it's just pathetic that we have to kowtow to basically a maniac who's throwing his weight around like he was some thug.
Yeah, you've just kind of laid out there how Canada should confront this, Canada and NATO more broadly. Um, I mean, successive Canadian governments have long understood that, of course, the melting ice in the Arctic would leave it more accessible, therefore possibly more vulnerable to Russian and Chinese interests, although that was traditionally seen as unlikely. Um, I suppose, can you spell it out for us? How exposed is the Arctic really? And given this new reality that Trump has created, are we more vulnerable to Russian and Chinese interests?
Well, I think we always have been. The Arctic has been invested in by the Russians since 2005. They started reopening old Soviet bases. I think they've got about 20 of them now. They've got a great capacity for working and surviving in the Arctic. Canada, on the other hand, we at the moment do not have a tremendous capacity. We have one exercise, famously called the exercise or Operation Nanook, excuse me, that happens in the Arctic once every summer, and then usually once in January or February as well. And the whole point is to make sure that we can operate up there, but we don't operate up there enough. And yes, we definitely have to show that we can. As Mr. Trump has shown, if you don't demonstrate that you can deter, that you can control your territory, not only our enemies, perhaps even our friends may start to push back on what we claim. So yeah, it's of the utmost importance, and it's something that we've had the luxury of forgetting since the end of the Cold War, and it is certainly come to slap us in the face in the modern day.
Yeah, I wonder how likely you think, Trump's disdain for alliances like NATO in particular, how likely you think the president is to continue expressing that. I mean, obviously, this so-called framework of a deal was seen as a de-escalation on the Greenland front, but I mean, he has been voicing disdain for NATO since his first term. And as you mentioned, this is an alliance that has helped keep its members safe for almost a century now. Just how vulnerable is NATO? And I mean, how else do you see perhaps Trump not giving up his NATO, his fight against NATO?
Well, yeah, I think you're correct. In his first term, he was very recalcitrant to say anything about Article 5, which is the heart of NATO. An attack upon one is an attack upon all. It took him, I think, 2 months, something like that, to actually say he would honor Article 5. John Bolton, I think Secretary Pompeo, General Mattis, all of them have mentioned that he would constantly, in their hearing, degrade NATO and say that the US should just leave it. That forced a vote in the House, I believe, to say that a president could not unilaterally just leave NATO. But yeah, the damage, a lot of the damage is already done by just not knowing if the United States would back up NATO. If Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania were invaded by Russia or Poland, for instance, would the United States defend them? That's the whole point of NATO, is that should not be a question. That is not even possible before Mr. Trump. The answer was always yes, because that's the only way NATO works, through deterrence. And deterrence does not work if you think there's an actual question, possible no to that answer.
NATO has certainly, of course, survived storms before throughout its history. I wonder, though, do you see it surviving Trump's second term?
Right. So, I mean, I do have a great deal of hope. NATO has become very resilient. Mr. Trump's first term had to push that on the alliance, but so did COVID, for instance. And the citizens of NATO, I think, are understanding that we do have to be somewhat flexible. Mr. Carney's speech at Davos was masterful. And the idea that middle powers have to band together is really just another extension of the insight of NATO. Of course, the United States was always a part of that, but the real idea of non-zero sum collaboration is always going to be like what shall I say, like a rule of the law of nature, where it's just one of those things where many will always be stronger when they are banded together. And it's I do not worry that we will forget that, because Mr. Trump has forced us to remember it. So no matter what happens in NATO in the future, we will have a element of the organization that remains strong. And whether or not that means that we have to wait for Mr. Trump to leave office, or whatever the future may hold, that insight, which so many died for in the past, and we worked so hard to build over the past 76 years, that will not be forgotten. We will not allow it to be forgotten. And I know that Canada will continue to push for a world which is governed by those ideas, which is in our interest and in our values.
Robert, such a pleasure to speak with you today and get your analysis and your insight on this. Thank you so much.
Not at all. A pleasure. Thanks so much.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can also reach us on Instagram at frequencypods or on Blue Sky at The Big Story. If you know someone who might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Caryn Ceolin.